Yo, what's good, guys? Chapter 870 is yet another chapter in a long series of other Whole Cake Island chapters that sets up and transitions to bigger events. As a whole, this chapter was great. It possessed a good balance of just about everything. Dialogue, tension, action, but left you with the feeling of craving just a few more pages. I'm probably not alone in the desire to have seen a few more pages depicting the exchanges between Luffy and Sanji's efforts to block Big Mom's attacks. Staying true to my reviewing nature though, let's start from the beginning. Chiffon's attempt to appeal to Big Mom is an action that has seen a small amount of criticism since the chapter's release, since surely it was a plan doomed to fail. But I find the reasoning behind the actions to be quite entertaining. This plea comes from a sense of desperation. Your back is against the wall and you're willing to try just about anything, which speaks volumes of the mindset of not only the Fire Tank Pirates but also of every party within Capone. In addition to that, I for one was pleased that Oda illustrated Big Mom's hatred towards Lola through her actions with Chiffon in the exact same manner stated by Chiffon when she talked with Nami earlier. Yet out of everything on the first page of the chapter, there was a section of dialogue that rose above the others in my eyes. Chiffon says, "Beige is my husband and we even have a child. Please spare us and overlook this." I perceive this dialogue in two manners. Either Big Mom was unaware that Capone and Chiffon were even married and had a child together, or Chiffon is using the classic good guy excuse you find in movies everywhere. You've all heard it before. "Please, no, I have a wife and kids back home. Spare me!" The latter of these options is most likely the more logical choice to choose, but I would not be surprised if the first was also true, simply because it would further emphasize how disconnected and shamed Lola and by default Chiffon is from the Big Mom family. It feels like I have been lobbying for respecting Capone over the past few reviews, but I think he does deserve even more credit after this chapter, on multiple fronts as well. Capone has, up until now, tanked an excessive amount of punches from Big Mom. If Capone were a main character of the series, for example, Sanji, the fandom would be losing their minds. Sanji stands would be crawling up the sides of buildings, invading people's houses, and writing prints all over their walls. And when you think about it, the Sweet Commanders and Ministers had the chance to try and hurt Capone, but they opted for trying to immobilize him instead of attacking directly like Big Mom. So that counts for something. The greatest highlight of the chapter for me was the scene in which Nami stops Luffy from leaving Capone and is illustrated as being the voice of reason for the crew. One of Luffy's defining characteristics, more so than probably any other person in the series, is his selflessness inherent to his kind nature. Luffy barely knows Capone, yet was willing to head out alone against the entirety of Big Mom's force simply because Capone was hurt. It's just one of those reasons why you just love Luffy as a character so much. Heading along those lines though, Nami also had an excellent show of character. She was capable of reading the situation, responding quickly while understanding Luffy's motive, and then being able to reason with him as well. Not many other characters in the series can claim to have done the same thing. This is kind of the opposite outcome to an earlier event in the arc in which Jinbei freed Luffy and Nami from Mont Dore's prison. Luffy, with a similar motive to what he has now, ran off to find Sanji amidst the many enemies in Big Mom's castle, but couldn't be stopped in time by Nami's warning about how they were defeated earlier that day. So it's an interesting contrast because it shows how much more Nami adapted to the situation. And due to that, you have to give your just dues to Nami, who, second to Brook, has had a great deal of shining moments in the arc, more so than what is normally given to her in your average arc, which, being a huge Nami fan myself, makes me pleased, and I hope it's something we see more of as the series progresses. While I'm at it, I'll lightly touch upon something I did not expect to be the result of this chapter. I suppose it goes to show my naive nature when it comes to the One Piece fandom. Did not expect the Zoro fanboys to jump at the mere mention of his name. It's like they didn't read that Nami and Brook said Zoro and everyone else. If this type of referencing weren't a common feature in the series, then I could see it being justified, but a majority of fans have come to the realization that there is a convincing pattern depicted whenever a crew member refers to another separated group of Nakama. Typically, if there is a lone member of the monster trio leading a group of people, they are referred to as insert name of monster trio member plus others. Needless to say that Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are looked to as the fighting leaders in the Straw Hats, So whenever they lead a faction of people, that group is referred to according to the member leading it. This is also apparent whenever Nami is leading a group as well. The Straw Hats, since the time skip, have been separated at least once every arc, so it definitely stands out a lot more now than it did in the past, although it happened frequently then as well. If there was a second place award to best moment of the chapter, from my perspective, I think that would go towards Capone and his dialogue. Concerning characterization, we've come to learn a lot about Capone, his motivations, what he cares about, and the lengths he's willing to go for it as well. If you were to go back in time before this arc and ask me if I thought Capone would get this much spotlight, I'd probably say you were crazy, go home! Yet, as of now, I find myself liking Capone more and more as this arc pans out, which is saying a lot since he was actually my least favorite supernova. Seeing the resolve Capone has towards his own crew was actually kind of hype for me. But then again, I think I have a vastly different perspective on One Piece as a whole than most fans, so I'm probably just the odd man out. I'm also probably in the minority of readers who thought that Sanji's dialogue with Judge was actually lackluster, at least in regard to what my own expectations were. Don't be misled though, I didn't think it was bad, but I didn't think it was good either. Overall, I'd say it was an okay scene. But here's my justification for that opinion. In the end, Sanji basically repeated verbatim exactly what he told Judge in the Vinsmokes earlier on in the arc when he was staying on Germa. The same Judge, I don't consider you my father, Zeph is, Vinsmoke Sanji died 13 years ago, and so forth. The only difference being is that as a result of the circumstances right now, Judge's response was, okay. I suppose I just wanted something new instead of basically a recap, but it served its purpose for momentarily wrapping up the Vinsmoke Sanji dilemma. Yet concerning that, to me, this didn't seem conclusive enough just to have everything between Sanji and Germa end there. At least not yet. It could very well be that way, but I have my reasons to believe that there will be at least one more interaction left, especially given the way this chapter ended, which I'm going to elaborate on later. Following the Sanji and Judge smackdown, there was a small confirmation that I've been waiting to hear for some time. The connection was clear as night and day since Judge and Caesar were both scientists, but it hadn't been confirmed. Now we know in all likelihood that Caesar was a part of the renegade group of scientists, just like Judge was, which I think could turn out to be a very important aspect in the future, hence why Oda depicted Nami kind of catching on to it. The circumstances of why scientists were renegades and whom all the members were is still up in the air, and will most likely play its part in the story one day. The Vinsmoke family leaves Capone, and directly after, Reiju basically gets smacked around by Big Mom, which, by the way, from all of the reviews I've seen thus far, no one has commented on the difference in strength of fire between Prometheus and that of the fire used against the Vinsmokes in the previous chapter. The Vinsmoke raid suits were alluded to essentially being fireproof, yet despite that, Big Mom was able to burn Reiju, which, if you don't already think Big Mom was insanely strong, this should add more credence to that, if it even needed to be added. From a plot perspective, Reiju being pit up against Big Mom seems to have been a method used by Oda to both characterize the Vinsmoke brothers and to set up Luffy and Sanji's importance moving forward, which the latter of that seems to be the most important of the two. The Vinsmokes being escorts for Capone is due to them being capable of flight with their raid suits, which then means that people who leave Capone should be capable of flight, otherwise they would be left behind, which is one of the two reasons Sanji left Capone. Skywalk is a useful technique, but looking at Sanji's dialogue to Luffy, quote, "That's right, nobody should come out except me," end quote, implies that Sanji doesn't know that Luffy is also capable of flying. Sanji has never seen Luffy go into Gear 4 before this point in time, so it's definitely logical for Sanji to say that. In fact, no one except Nami has seen Luffy go into Gear 4 from this current group. And even then, it's unclear as to how much of Gear 4 Nami saw versus Cracker, so it's also possible that Nami does not know Luffy can fly as well. This lack of information could play a role into adding drama and concerns to Luffy in future chapters, and I kind of expect it to as well. If you take away the multiple X factors in this arc, like putting Peckham's Pound in the Tamate Baka box, this situation basically screams that Luffy, bar being carried by someone, will be forced to go into Gear 4 at some point, which just the thought alone gives me the chills. You guys already know I'm a Luffy fanboy, so I mean, what do you expect? This is where I start to question things though. Luffy isn't fighting to defeat people. He's fighting to stall for time and to protect. Taking that motivation, there are obvious limitations as to what he should be capable of doing in Gear 4, at least in Bounce Man. In a defensive effort, Tank Man seems like the most logical form of Gear 4 for Luffy to transform into. And so I expect in the next couple chapters, Luffy to go into normal version of Tank Man, simply because it would align well with the hints given to us earlier in the arc when Luffy went full version, as well as that it would parallel nicely with the whole comparisons between Enies Lobby and this arc. Numerous people have commented, Gear 5th hype, in the community, but I don't see that happening. Gear 5, although it may seem arrogant for me to say, is too huge of a reveal for the last couple chapters of this arc, especially since we don't know if it exists. The only possible way I can see Gear 5th being used, if it exists, is if it was in the same manner Gear 3rd was revealed in Enies Lobby, which is, Luffy will say Gear 5th, and then it panels somewhere else, and then we come back and all we see is the aftermath. But I don't really like this idea, to be honest. Every time Luffy uses a different gear, there is a different side effect to his body, and that wouldn't bode well for trying to escape if Luffy went Gear 5th and ended up being basically boned. There are two things that stood out to me by the end of this chapter though, both potentially being crucial aspects of the plot. Over the past few weeks, Oda has made it a trend to show one panel of pudding per chapter. We had it last week, and the week before, and a few times consecutively prior to Big Mom's flashback. It's highly logical to assume that Pudding has the potential to become the most important person relative to the Straw Hats' escape, and yet in this chapter, there wasn't a single panel of her. I guess this all boils down to a question of when will Pudding come back into play, and in what fashion. Even if you don't like Pudding as a character, I would find it very hard for someone to argue against the logic that Pudding will have an important role to play come the final wrap-up of this arc, since there's such a great deal of evidence to back it up. But given the magnitude of the current situation, I would find it very hard for Oda to throw her into the plot and be effective unless certain conditions were met. Her Devil Fruit is more suited to small numbers of people, not the chaos occurring right now. After all, if Pudding could wipe an entire battlefield of enemies' memories all at once, that would qualify as an ass pull in my book. Pudding has an opportunity to get more interactions with Sanji if the Tamate Bako box explodes and destroys the castle. We all know that sooner or later it's going to blow, and if you follow shonen logic, then you already know that things don't fall at the same rate as gravity makes it fall in real life. I would be personally shocked if we didn't see it blow up within the next chapter or the one after that. Assuming that the Tamate Bako box explodes though, as many people have had the same idea, it will probably destroy Big Mom's castle, which would then not only be an opportunity for the Vinsmokes and Straw Hats to leave or become injured, it also provides a way for Pudding to become relevant in the plot, since you would only assume that the Big Mom pirates would then become disorganized, and it would then give Pudding a chance to move. My second idea has to deal with the absolute shit that is Capone's plan. Have any of you realized that Caesar has to fly all the way to Capone's ship before there is any form of safety? And then after that, the Straw Hats have to somehow make it back to the Sunny, which is not only time consuming, but also dangerous because it gives more chances for Big Mom's subordinates to catch up. And it doesn't even end there. The major component of Capone's original plan was to escape using the mirrors from Brûlé, right? Because each party placed one on their respective ships. But Brûlé was recently stolen back from them by Katakuri. So what's stopping Brûlé from using her powers to bring Big Mom directly to their ships? The Tamate Bako box? And even above that, you have concerns about whether Germa is even enough to protect Caesar from the Sweet Commanders and Big Mom. You have the explosion of the Tamate Bako box, which could also be a negative aspect to hurt people because it also could serve the role of separating them as well. And finally, even if Capone and Luffy get back to their own ships, they have to go back through all of the dangerous islands in Totland, out the front door and through security, which all of this takes days to accomplish. It actually took a very long time for the Straw Hats to reach Whole Cake Island. Objectively speaking, this plan is so that it screams that for anything to reach a sound conclusion, there must be some insane twist coming up that completely shifts the tides of the arc. I don't see a way in which this isn't so. From all the things I just named, it's basically as impossible as the plan was to kill Big Mom. And within all this complexity, we still have Peckham's and Pound to wrap up. How insane is the ending of this arc going to be? Take into account all of the factors disabling the Straw Hats from leaving. There is a small chance, and I don't see this happening, but it's technically a possibility, but Pudding knows where the Sunny is docked. So there is a small chance that Pudding could bring the Sunny to the Straw Hats. Although that still leaves a lot of problems up in the air, right? But then again, Pudding was the person to get them to Whole Cake Island, so then again, she could be the person to help them leave. Earlier in the review, I mentioned that I believe there will be another huge event involving the Vinsmokes. And now I'm going to explain why I think that's so. I talked about the trend involving Pudding in the past few chapters, but there's also a second trend that I noticed within this chapter that I also commented on in my previous chapter review, and that is the fact that Oda is hiding Judge's combat abilities. Whenever the Vinsmokes saved the Straw Hats last chapter, Judge didn't do anything. In this chapter, the Vinsmokes walk out of Capone into gunfire, and the only person who isn't shown in a panel is Judge. He is MIA. Surely this isn't a coincidence. Oda is planning something big with Judge, I'm sure of it. If he weren't, then what's the point? We're 50 odd chapters into this arc, and people are still wondering if Judge has curly eyebrows. Some other event within this arc relevant to Germa and Sanji is going to happen. And this isn't because I want more from Judge and Sanji. From the narrative we've been given, I think there basically has to be more, right? Look at the way Oda has set up the groupings of people. Sanji and Luffy are now with Germa, and the rest of the crew technically is in a different party with Capone. So if anything bad were to occur, we'd have the potential of Sanji being with his family, and then something else happening with Luffy. It presents good opportunities to have more interactions. Gee willikers, Batman. I have been talking so much and I still haven't even covered all that I wanted to talk about. But I don't want to bore you guys any further, so I'll just end things here. Let me know what your thoughts are on everything I've said. Did you like the chapter? How do you think this arc will wrap up, and why? Be sure to let me know. Like, comment, and subscribe if you like my shit. Until next time, see ya.